In this video, we'll be going over how to securely provide your secret keys and your passwords to your Next.js application through a thing called environment variables. I'll also be walking you through how to upload these credentials onto Vercel so that it can embed these credentials into your Next.js application. So whenever you build a web app, you're most likely going to be using a lot of third-party services. So for example, if you need to upload images and a way to store them, you want to use something like S3. If you want to handle payments, you want to use something like Stripe. And if you want to store your users' data, you want to use a database like Postgres. Whenever you want to interact with these services, you're going to have to make API calls or requests to them. And the way that you securely do that is, let's say you have an S3 bucket that is your own and you don't want anyone else to have access to it other than you. You need to pass in your API key or a secret access key to S3 so that S3 can verify that this request came from a trusted user that has access to that secret key. S3 will have a local copy of that private key so it can validate any request that it gets. And then the same thing can happen for Stripe and your Postgres password, right? Only they have access to your password so they can authenticate any request that comes through. So whenever you set up these services, it's going to give you a access key, a password, or some sort of token that only you should have access to. And you want to upload these credentials onto your Next.js application. So whenever you want to make a request to that downstream service, you'll either pass your secret key or sign that request so then that downstream service can verify it. So now the problem becomes, how do you securely embed these credentials into your Next.js application? So a very bad and naive way to do this is to create some sort of file that stores all your keys and your passwords. And then every time that you set up a new service that gives you a password or a key, you upload it to this file and then you push it to GitHub. That way, whenever your Next.js application starts up, it has access to those keys and then it'll pass it to all these services. Now, everything I just said, do not do. Let me repeat that. Do not do whatever I just said. And the reason for this is all these keys are uploaded to GitHub. And if your GitHub repository is public, then anyone on the internet has access to your private keys. The issue with that is if you have access to the secret key or the password, then anyone can make a request to your Postgres database. Anyone can access your Stripe. Anyone can access your S3 bucket. When you upload these keys to GitHub on a public repository, that is now considered public data. There's a reason why so many people tell you and emphasize that you should never upload your keys onto GitHub. So if you can't upload your keys onto a file and push all that to GitHub, how do you securely pass in your environment variables to your Next.js application? And that's where a thing called environment variables come into play. So when you're developing your web app locally on your laptop, you can create what's called a .env file. You want to upload all your credentials, your secret keys, and your passwords onto a .env file. Whenever your Next.js application spins up, it's going to take all these credentials and embed it into this Next.js application. So now whenever you need to make an API call to like your S3 bucket, for example, you can grab that secret key that's embedded in your Next.js application and pass it into the request here. This .env file, you never upload to GitHub and you always keep it locally on your laptop or on your desktop. So now the question becomes, how do I replicate this process on a beta or a production environment where I'm serving real users? So this is where Vercel comes into play and the concept of an environment variable actually starts to make sense. So whenever you work on your Next.js application locally on your laptop, you have a local instance of a .env file, and it takes all those keys and embeds it into your Next.js application. But whenever you deploy your Next.js application with Vercel and onto different environments, the process is a little different. How it works is you will go into the Vercel UI and you will upload all your keys and your credentials onto Vercel for a specific environment. So let's say I'm creating a new S3 bucket and I'm creating a new IAM user so then that my Next.js application can upload to this S3 bucket. I created 3 instances of this S3 bucket and 3 instances of this IAM user. One for development, one for beta, and one for production. So if I want to embed these keys into my Next.js application for my beta and my production environment, I would first have to upload the key onto Vercel for that beta specific environment. So my beta IAM user will go into the beta environment variable file. And then my production access key will go in the production.env file. If Vercel is deploying my Next.js application for a production environment, it's going to grab all the keys and the production.env file, and it's going to embed that into the Next.js application. That way now, whenever I make a request to S3, I know that I'm in a production environment, so I make that request to the production AWS account. And because I have the secret access key for the production IAM user, AWS can verify that this request is legitimate and it'll accept my upload. So now if Vercel is deploying to my beta environment, is going to grab all the credentials and the keys from the beta.env file. So take all these keys and then embed it into the Next.js application. And because my Next.js application knows I'm in the beta environment now, it's going to make that API call to the beta bucket. And because this has the secret access key for the beta environment, AWS can verify that this request is legit. So this is how you're able to pass in different credentials and different access keys for different types of environments. So let's recap all of this real quick. Whenever you onboard onto a new service that gives you a secret access key or a password, you want to upload all these credentials onto Vercel. So you want to upload the production key onto the production.env file. You want to upload the beta key onto your beta.env file. And you want to repeat that process for every other environment that you have. Because you deployed all your credentials onto Vercel, whenever you deploy your Next.js application for a specific environment, it's going to get all the environment variables for that specific environment. It's going to take all the keys for the production environment and it's going to embed it in your Next.js application. And then now, whenever you need to make a request to S3, for example, you can use this access key specific to your production environment. So now that you understand how environment variables work, let's go ahead and do this for our own web app, where we'll be uploading our secret access key for our IAM user onto Next.js and onto Vercel. All right, so this is my homepage for my Next.js application. And let me just run this up real quick. And then if I go to localhost 3000, you'll see that it's serving this up right here. So then the first thing that we want to do is we want to create that environment variable. So I'm going to go here into the sidebar, and then I'm going to click new file. And I'm going to name it .env. So here, I'm just going to give an example environment variable. So next public, and then I'll just call this example value. All right, and then here, I'm just going to change up the homepage to give you a demo of how to access your environment variables. All right, so here I have a button where if I click on it, it'll console log my environment variable. So then when I go back into the diagram and you see that I have an environment variable here, we want a way to get access to it so that we can pass this key to something like S3 or to Stripe or our Postgres database. And in the way that you get access to this embedded key is that you do this here. Process.env. The name of the environment variable. This will look into your environment variables and it'll grab you this value here. So if I go into my demo page and I click show API URL, you'll see that it's outputting example value here. And then just to note, whenever you prefix your environment variables in Next.js with next_public, it would output it into your console log here. So then if I were to remove that part and I just do API URL and then I just do API URL here, if I were to click on it again, you'll see that it'd be undefined. So this just gives you a way to have public and private environment variables. So whenever you're dealing with private keys and access keys and passwords, you want to make sure that you keep that private and only let your server access. But if it's something that you want your client to have access to, something like an API URL, for example, that it's okay to be public. So now that you know how to create a .env file, how to upload your keys, and how to access those keys through your web app, let's go ahead and upload the access keys for our IAM user for our web app. So in the previous video, we wrote infrastructure as code so that we can create the IAM user that has a policy to upload images to our S3 bucket. And we also created the secret access key and the public access key so that we can give it to our Next.js application. So what we need to do here is we need to get this access key and put it into our Next.js application. So this was the code that we wrote to create that infrastructure. We have the IAM user, and we created the access keys here. And the thing that we did was we exported our user access key and a secret access key here. So now what we want to do is we want to output the access key and the secret access key so that we can give it to our .env file. So in order to do this, I'm going to open up my terminal and I'm going to do pulumi stack output and then my access key. All right, so here, this is going to be my access key, and then I want to do the same thing for my secret access key. So here, pulumi stack output, and then I'm doing -- show secrets, so then it'll actually output my secret key. So then now here we have our access key, and then we have our secret access key here as well. So now let's go ahead and take these values and put it into our .env file for our web app. So then here, I'm setting up two environment variables. I'm setting up a Next.js app IAM user access key, and then a Next.js app IAM user secret access key here. So whatever keys that were outputted from our Pulumi program, we want to add it here instead of example value. So then now, whenever your Next.js application needs to upload an image onto S3, we can grab the secret access key from our Next.js environment variable by referring to it as this. We would do process.env.nextjs app IAM user secret access key, something like this. In a future video, we'll set up the S3 client, but just for now, just know that whenever you need access to your secret keys and all of your environment variables, this is how you do it. Process.env the environment variable name. So now that we set up our access key and our secret access key for our IAM user and our developer account and environment, we now need to do the same thing for our production deployments, and we need to upload it to Vercel. All right, so here I'm on the dashboard page for my Vercel account, and I'm going to click on Visual Utils, and then I need to find the spot where I can upload my environment variables. So it's going to be this part right here. So then here, I want to upload my key. I want to make sure that I only have production clicked. So I'm going to copy this and then I'm going to paste it here. And then here, I'm just passing it example value, but you actually want to pass in the real access key and a secret access key here. So then I'm going to click save here, and then it's going to add my environment variables. So now whenever I deploy my production Next.js application through Vercel, Vercel is going to grab all the environment variables that we configured for our production account, and it's going to embed it into our Next.js application. All right, so here Vercel gives you a UI of all the keys that you have for your different environments. And as you can see here, I didn't upload anything from my development or my preview. I only updated it for my production. So now let's say I uploaded a development one here as well. So I go back into my keys and my environment variables, and I paste it here. Let me just name it dev. If I save this and I reload the page, you'll see here that I have different environment variables for different environments. So then the development version of this IAM user secret access key will look like this. And then the production version will look like this. So you have a way to have the same environment variable name, but give it different values for different environments that you're deploying to. And all of that corresponds with this diagram here, right? We have production specific environment variables. We have beta specific environment variables. And whenever Vercel needs to deploy those environments, we grab the keys from there and then embed it here. So that is how you're able to securely pass in your secret keys and your passwords onto Vercel and onto Next.js in a secure way. And you have a way to do it for different environments that you have. And in the next video, I'm going to show you how you can take that access key and embed it into the request to S3, Stripe, or Postgres, so then that you can assume different credentials for that downstream service. So with that, I hope you learned something new, and I'll see you in the next one.